Welcome to the Best Music Podcast with Dan Spencer. My name is Dan. This week's featured guest is VJ Manzo. VJ Manzo is an associate professor of music technology and cognition at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, aka WPI. He is a composer and guitarist with research interests in theory, composition, artificial intelligence, interactive music systems, and music cognition. VJ is the author of several books published by Oxford University Press, including Max SP Jitter for Music, Foundations of Music Technology, and co-author of Interactive Composition and Environmental Sound Artists. He has made 81 apps, written 5 books, composed over 398 pieces, and drank somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 million cups of coffee, though we'll get the down low on those numbers. For those of you on audio, he's on his 8 million and first right now as we speak. At WPI, he is the founder and director and principal investigator of the Interactive Music Systems Lab, that's the IMSLab, and the Electric Guitar Innovation Lab, that's EGIL, and a co-director of the Media Arts Group Innovation Center called Magic. You can find him and an amazing amount of learning at vjmanzo.com. That's vjmanzo.com, youtube.com/vjmanzo, and electricguitarinnovationlab.org. VJ, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, for people who don't know, which is probably most people, I actually had you as a professor in my freshman year of college at Montclair State University. And when I started this podcast, I was thinking back to all the professors who I would love to have on. And of course I wanted to talk to you because your class was radical. I think the name of the class was something like maybe music technology or technology in music. But what you ended up doing is you gave us like crash courses in like Pro Tools, Logic, and then you actually taught us the basics of coding our own musical instruments and working with sine waves and all sorts of crazy stuff, which you can actually find in your books and just so many cool things. So,
oh man, thanks so much for saying that. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So absolutely radical to have you on. And before we head into this, I really want to make sure that everyone listening to this knows that going to vjmanzo.com to illustrate everything we're going to talk about it's the way to go. You go to vjmanzo.com and then click on like the research tab and go look at all the different projects. It's insane, stuff you're doing, which of course we're going to talk about. But just so everyone knows, we'll have a link in the show notes right up at the top, vjmanzo.com. So VJ, what's a piece of music or song you heard recently that really stood out to you?
I find myself always coming back to music from the 70s and 80s. So does that question limit it to the scope of things that have come out in the past few years? Okay.
No.
All right. So then if we're really being specific, I haven't really progressed out of the Baroque time period. And this is kind of a weird thing to say, but here we are, may as well go right into it. So I've become aware of the Baroque music. And so what have I been listening to lately? I've been getting back into the Brandenburg concertos.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I wasn't going to talk about classical music, but here it is again. I only got into classical music. Really, I stumbled into it out of an extension of like prog rock music, like if classical music were a YouTube video, it would say prog music got me here. And, and every now and again, I'll just return to that and be like, wow, where do we go from here? Did it all max out from here? I'm not really sure. So, and then Bach is really just the focal point of my life. So I'm still trying to work through a lot of that. So when people give me, this happens all the time. If you're a music professor, people give you their, they proselytize about their favorite music. Oh, you got to check out this. I got to do that. I have a backlog, and that backlog is like somewhere. It's like 1715. It's like, So anyway, that's what I've been listening to lately. I hope that doesn't sound pretentious, but it is the truth.
Not at all. So you're trying to work through everything everyone's given you to listen to, all the recommendations that have come, and you have a backlog of music to listen to, but you've been going in chronological order of the recommendations, and so you're still in the Baroque era.
I'm in the Baroque. The French suites is really where I have been. That's what I was listening to while I was doing a little bit of yard work yesterday, and then doing the dishes. And it's funny too with that stuff. Like I listen to it and it's hard to not just like, shout like, oh my gosh, like this guy, like holy, it's just really, really good. And, there's an entry barrier there for sure, I think. But yeah. So anyway, so when someone says to me, oh, check out this other song, this like 3-minute song, I'm like, all right, well, that's good. I liked that too. But if we're comparing the previous thing that I just listened to, it's really difficult to do that. And that's not really fair, but, that's just what it is.
I always found the Brandenburg concertos to be very comforting. Maybe it's because they were played to me as a child, but like they always just have this really sort of warm tonal, just like it's a warm tonal blanket.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I grew up and I didn't listen to classical music at all. Like that was like that was not a thing in our house. No one in my family liked that stuff. And so I thought that was like old stodgy music. And I guess to be fair, a lot of, there's quite a bit that is this kind of like, highbrow, high society type of thing. But Brandenburg Concerto No. 5. The first movement, there's like this section in there, this harpsichord solo that as a guitarist,
it
shreds. Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember encountering that as like, I guess like an 18-year-old and 19-year-old and not knowing what it was and being like, what the heck? What is it? What am I listening to here? If I was going to drop a profanity on your show, it would have been right there. Because really when I listen to that, it's just puzzling. It's just absolute. And that is part of the thing where I say to myself, did we, like, I'm glad that a lot of music came after 1750, but there's part of me that also wonders too, like, did we just kind of like switch gears? Like what happens if we would have continued in that vein? And, it's just interesting because, you talked about AI, referring to some of the stuff that I'm interested in. And a lot of these AI models like Google Magenta and some of the work by a guy named David Cope, who was really a pioneer in this area. It, by and large, they train these systems on mostly Bach chorales, but then other things. And so, Bach is just like, because there's so much of what he did that is just so undeniably excellent for what it is. And it's so consistent that if you're trying to, get a sense of how something could be, why not use that as a model? There's a great sample size, and so a lot of these systems do. So anyway, all that to say, like for me as just a human being on planet Earth, I think to myself like, well, I like a lot of the music that came afterward. And like I said, I grew up on like 90s alt rock and 90s pop rock and things like that. And I love all that stuff. It has a special place in my heart. But in terms of like art music, there's this part of me that thinks like, well, can we write stuff that sounds like Bach again? Like, can anyone do that? I can't do that. I wish I could, but there's a market for it. I don't know, Yngwie Malmsteen, as a guitar player.
But before Yngwie, Vinnie Moore. If we look at sort of like the godfather of modern shred guitar, we'd go to Vinnie Moore, and a lot of those patterns that he was using, even before Yngwie's time, are those sort of what we call now neoclassical shred. It's Bach at 200 BPM, 16th notes with distortion.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There is always going to be some percentage of the population that just hears that and smiles, and I'm part of that population. Yeah, I'm always there for it. I do this music tech summer camp for middle school kids, and this is largely the only kind of K through 12 teaching I do these days. But there's always some student that finds, I have an assignment where I have them get MIDI files from the internet and put them into a DAW and then synthesize them. And there's always some student, typically an 11-year-old boy, who finds some Bach piece, cranks it up as fast as it will go, gets it with a sound that's as loud as it will go, and this sort of thing. And I'm like, well, there it is. There's the next generation. So.
Oh, shredders of all generation going after Bach.
It's funny.
So, VJ, I think it's an interesting point. Maybe we could clarify this before we move forward, that, talking about AI right now, it's almost an incorrect use of AI. Perhaps a more accurate term would be machine learning, because the machine learning is we haven't quite gotten to like true artificial intelligence. What we're talking about really is throwing a ton of numbers, like you said, a large sample size of the Bach into something, and it coming out in the fancy way of saying that. And it's so much more fun to say, this was made with artificial intelligence, as to say, this was made with machine learning. Like, which one's the buzzword? So can you maybe just clarify a little bit the differences there, and then how the outlook changes for the different types of work you're doing? We can talk about the different types of work you're doing with the machine learning artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So machine learning is a subset of what they would call AI, the larger picture. I don't do as much in machine learning. There's typically a larger component of robotics that tends to get involved in that too. But AI, just in its sort of basic state, the idea that you are going to make some sense of rules and orders and things that already exist. So, in the case of the early days of artificial intelligence, I mentioned this person, David Cope. So there's an element of what they would call algorithmic composition that tends to get bundled into this discussion when you talk about AI with music, largely because you want to have some sort of output for the AI. What is the AI for? It should be to inform some sort of decision, and typically those decisions that as musicians we care about are related to performance, or most often composition. So this could be, if you're using Finale or Sibelius and you start composing something, they suggest some sort of, here you might want to end the phrase this way, some sort of notation things happen. That's kind of like the practical end user's way of understanding how AI can be helpful for them. I mentioned Google Magenta, the idea that if you use, there are a suite of plugins with Google Magenta where you might give it a rhythm or give it some sort of drum beat, and then it kind of adapts that based on what you have. It tries to infer some sort of context of what you're going for, and then make a few recommendations for how you can make variations on that. For those composers listening, if you're saying, well, like, I don't really care about that, I make my own variations, I don't need a tool. I don't need a tool to do that. I completely understand that too. If you've ever listened to strict AI compositions, you might be left thinking like it's kind of vanilla. And I don't disagree with you. There's a lot of kind of music out there with that. But one story worth noting is the work of this guy, David Cope, who in the late 50s, early 60s, was hired to do an opera, and did all the things that a human being would do when they're commissioned to write an opera. If you're ever commissioned to write an opera, that doesn't really happen so much anymore. But if you get that gig, if I hired you to say, oh, I want to write me a song that sounds like early 2000s Backstreet Boys or something like that, you would go through this process of like, all right, I'm going to go listen to their entire catalog, get a sense of like what are the nuances, the subtle cues, and all those types of things, instrumentation. So Cope did the same thing with all the heavy hitters of opera that you would think, and started to get a sense of what is in the terrain, what is expected in an opera, where are some areas of departure that I can integrate there too. Now that's like the human intelligence, that's like what human beings would do. So the way that you would teach a machine to do that through artificial intelligence is you can either program in certain rules, by which you would say, if this, then this. Or another way of doing it is this idea of machine learning, that you somehow have a data-driven approach. So in Cope's case, he took all, and also in like the Google Magenta case, they took all these Bach chorales and started to find ways to make sense of how harmonic motion occurs in those things. And then instead of it being VJ Manzo is going to make theory rules for Bach chorales based on what I'm observing, the machine learns and picks up these different types of patterns that, 5 chords tend to go to 1 chords, and 1 chords can kind of go anywhere, and 2 chords typically precede 5 chords, and then also how often does that happen? So it's a much more, I guess you can say, an objective way of learning about things, which is why machine learning is so hot, is that who would pick up on that? You took theory classes, so did I, and like, oh man, I missed that one. I didn't realize what they were doing here. Wow, I'm 5 bars into this modulation, and I only picked up on it 2 bars ago. So, machines can make sense of that, and they can make sense of all sorts of other things. So in the case of Cope and many others, Bach tends to be a starting point for getting. And so then what is the end result? The end result is, if you, for example, go to David Cope's website, you can download 15,000 Bach chorales that, that all sound exactly like Bach, and they kind of are Bach, but Bach never composed them. So that tends to be one outlet for algorithm composition and AI, is that it's great for making derivative works, but it can also be a great way of extending the body of work for existing composers, or also just informing new ideas.
And one of the apps, I should say, that you've written is along a similar vein to this, that you can play on a piano keyboard a given note. It'll generate within a key a chord. And then as you're playing the chord, you can see suggestions of where that chord might typically go. Oh no, I think you were using number keys on a computer keyboard, excuse me. And then so you're pressing the number keys on the keyboard, which are generating a chord up from the tonic. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you have even secondary dominants and all sorts of other things that can get suggested. But like when you would pick the secondary dominant, let's say you pick the 5 of 2, the next chord that would be suggested would be the 2. So can you talk a little bit about that app that you wrote?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So that's like, compared to the thing I just mentioned, that's kind of like the VJ Manzo practical for everybody type
yes,
of,
exactly.
Thanks. I mostly work with undergraduates these days and people who are just getting used to into the game of composing something, and they're not interested in writing 4-part chorales or fugues or things like that. So the things that I want to focus on are generally related to how can you make a 4-minute pop song or a rock song or something like that, and then like, all right, what's the established domain there? So one of the things that I love about pop music that people tend to kind of dismiss about it is that they use mostly diatonic chords. The tempo stays where it is. It's very kind of compartmentalized in terms of the form. There's a certain progression for this part there too, which is great if you're just getting into this stuff. And it's part of the reason why I like it so much and I like teaching it. So that particular app does what like a good teacher would do, I think. If you come up with a chord progression, sometimes you don't quite know where to go next, and it's hard to know how to kind of vamp around a certain type of groove. So that app provides those types of suggestions. Here are some options that most people do. You're not rigidly confined to going with the suggestions. You can kind of deviate from them, but it's like a helper.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also not confining you to sort of the 4-bar, 8-bar, 16, 32-bar system of the way we would typically think of a 4/4 pop song working. Like, let's say you play a 1, 5, 4, 5. So whole notes: 1, 5, 4, 5, and then after 5, you have a suggestion to go to 6. You have a suggestion to go to 4. You also have a suggestion to go back to 1. So you can go 6 and then 5 and then 2, 5. and then play another 5 and 1, and then you've ended up with something like 9 measures, and that's your form. So I think it leaves open avenues for interpretation outside of the harmonic.
Yeah, market forces being what they are, that will dictate a lot of what makes a successful pop song. So, that's largely out of my control, So, I just want to let students know, like, you have some options here. But also, one of the things that's difficult is that when you talk about composition in education, you don't want to confine anyone to saying, well, it must be like this. It should be this form. I mean, that's just a normal teacher thing. And, we all want people to explore whatever they want and not feel like it's being prescribed to them. However, it's sometimes difficult to get started. And without some sort of a template and some sort of understanding of what is expected, it's just a blank page. And that's, for someone like me, like, oof, that's even more, anxiety inducing, like, where do I begin here? And, even Microsoft Word has that little paperclip thing that says, like, hey, it looks like you're trying to write a letter, but if you open up, and so there's a pro and a con when you open up a piece of software, like a digital audio workstation, that it's just this blank thing and you can do whatever you want there too. But I think the average person, like I say this to my students, I'll stop that thought and just say, like, how many piano sounds do you need, in your life? And, like, not how many do you have available on your computer? Because if you have, like, I use Ableton Live, and there are so many different piano sounds in there too. How many do you actually need is, like, the question, and not just what options. I want to have lots and lots of options, and I think you need 4. Like, let me just pick a number, 4. I don't know. I think maybe someone only needs 2. It's like guitar sounds too. I'm working on this project now, and, like, how many different guitar sounds do you need? I don't know, 5. You need a clean kind of washy. You need an overdrive, moderately overdriven. You need something kind of heavy and chunky. You need a great lead sound. I don't know if how many more do you need beyond that? And this is the tough one though. This starts to get into tough area, because just as human beings, we all like to have lots and lots of options, and we like to know that we're not limited or whatnot. And then, like, you go to make a piece, and, paralysis by analysis. You have all of these, where do you even start? So the same can be said about form and just, like, keys and progression. So I try to at least training wheels some of these things when I'm working with people who are not familiar with this. Like, all right, here are some, like, I have a folder of MIDI clips that are just chords in the key of C major, and they're labeled, like, 1 through 8. Like, here, make a progression, make a 4-bar progression with these things there too. And then, if you say that to a certain type of person, they're like, it's so simple. How come you're, teaching them to do it in just C major? Like, well, I'm not limiting them. They can make it modulate wherever they want there too. But why don't we start with this and then kind of move on from there? So anyway, a lot of the technology that I make tends to just serve very specific types of functions like that. Like, I'm teaching a thing, or I want students to do a particular type of thing, and then I'll go and make an app that does that one thing really, really well, and is probably not so useful for anything else besides that one particular operation.
Something that really stood out to me in watching some of your lectures and talks and things is that you talk about making these different tools and softwares for, like you said, students who may be just coming into music for the first time. They're maybe not trained musicians, or even students that have learning disabilities. And your goal with a lot of these apps is to separate the actions of music making from the cognitive and time requirement of actually playing an instrument.
Yes, I did say that. Yeah. I mean, you want to know kind of like the kind of the gist of that. The gist of that thing is, you're a guitarist. So, like, when you were learning to play guitar, you had this weird 6-stringed thing that you had to figure out this thing. And then if you're like me, I didn't start reading music until later on in life, but so I already knew how to play guitar a little bit at that point. But I was looking at...
you were playing it like CBGBs. It wasn't just a little bit of... I mean, you were playing guitar.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. And yeah, so but if you don't know how to read music, most guitar players don't know how to read music, and guitar is the most popular instrument in the world, arguably. So go figure. There's a lot of people out there that don't know how to read music, and you can feel like you don't really have really much of a language there. So if you do decide that you want to focus on learning to read or learning to understand the theoretical aspects of what makes something work, whether that be something that's a more any kind of piece, really, you can feel like kind of lost. You can feel like the two don't really connect. So I've taught a number of students where they're trying to make a connection between the instrument that they're playing and this weird 5-line 4-space thing that they're seeing up there. And for guitar, it doesn't really fit on the staff, so like you're kind of stuck there too. And like, all right, well, fine, well, maybe we'll teach them tab. Like you just put your fingers there, and what? It's upside down, and it doesn't really work, right? So it's like this other level of abstraction that you have to do, and it doesn't. It's a lot. It's a lot to expect of a 7-year-old. So I mean, let alone like like a 47-year-old, 57-year-old, So a lot of people approach music at middle age too, and so if somebody says to me like, hey, I just want to learn how to play like some Led Zeppelin, or I just want to play Green Day. I'm not looking to be famous. I'm not looking to do this. I just want to be able to sit around the campfire with my friends and play some stuff. I feel like that's like the most fun, one of the very fun aspects of what we do as musicians. And if there are some tools that we can develop to help the entry barrier for that person to get to that point, let's do it. Can technology do that? So a lot of the technology I make tends to compartmentalize here's a simple tool that can get you to play some chords, because the objective here is to get you to hear how they function, so that when you spend 40 hours a week trying to play these chords on your guitar, you'll understand how they all can interlock and work together to make a pattern, but we're not going to try and do both things at one time, and it doesn't need to be that you do one or the other, but just right now we're just talking about listen to this journey tune and listen to this 4-bar, 4-chord progression. And can you hear how it goes? That sort of thing. Here's this little technology-based tool that will help you just kind of spit out the chords quicker, so we can have this conversation about chord progressions and then move on.
Yes, I actually remember distinctly in your class you playing the progression from Don't Stop Believing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. That's I'm really glad to be talking with you. And I'm glad that you were there then. Those were like my formative years as whatever I am right now. It certainly had its roots in those days. So there was a lot of stuff that I tried out. There was a lot that I tried out that didn't really work, but there were certain things that I tried out that I'm really glad, like, wow, this really great. And I tend to write like that too. The books that you mentioned, those all come out of conversations, largely come out of conversations that I have in the classroom, and people saying like, Manzo, that makes no sense at all. Oof, man, let's try again. And then like, you just revise it more and more, so that when you see in printed text, it's been vetted by the most critical audience of all. Actually, I should qualify that. The most critical audience of all are when we develop these music-based video games throughout the year, and different types of weird apps and music-making controllers and stuff like that. And that's all well and good when you're talking to people in their early 20s, or a little bit older. But when you give it to a 10-year-old, that's it. Then if you've got a dud, This is boring, just declares it unilaterally. All the students then stop. It is boring. He said it's boring. All right. Well, it took me like 200 hours to do that, but okay, we'll move on to something else. Thanks.
So speaking of the games that you write and the different interactive music softwares that you create, could you talk a little about EAMIR?
I would love to talk about EAMIR. So EAMIR is my baby. It started off as an anagram, the electroacoustic musically interactive room. So here was me teaching when I was doing my master's, or I was finishing my master's, and I was teaching K through 12 music at this little private school. And we didn't have really a big budget for a lot of things, and it was kind of like you just teach them music and do something musical with them, but nobody really had a lot of prior music skills, which is common in a lot of smaller private schools. So at the same time, I was exploring these AI and different types of coding and learning to program, really, and thinking, well, what is the outlet for all of this? What do I want to do with all of this knowledge? Do I just want to make tools to help me as a composer? Do I want to make tools to help me as a teacher? And I also wanted to make tools to help people perform easier. It's the same type of thing. So I started making little things that made noise around the classroom that were all hooked up to this one computer. So, a little sensor, and if they step on it, it just plays diatonic scale notes, and then somebody else has a thing that plays chords. And so the goal was to just have a room where everyone could be, kind of Willy Wonka-ish, that one scene where they're all going around and like eating everything in the room. I just want that, except instead of eating stuff, music, or I guess, eating stuff and making music would be the goal there, to put it in those terms. But if I had to settle for one, just, you hit the panel on the floor, you wave your hand or something like that, and something responds with a musical thing that is at least somewhat related to the gesture that you did. So that's where EAMIR started. And, a certain type of person finds that interesting. And then, a lot of other people are kind of like, well, I don't know. Not for me. But for what I found is that the people who were really, really interested in that were open to having it in their own classroom and then having some version of that. And so I thought that was a very cool thing. And I was charged up about it, because who doesn't love that? All sorts of novel ways to make music. So I started putting up little apps, little standalone versions of these one-off apps up on this website, and EAMIR.org, EAMIR.org. And I started putting the code up there too, as here, if you want to make this, it's written in a language called Max. And if you want to use this and adapt this, you can. Here's the code. And then people would almost invariably ask, like, well, how do I make these modifications to this to make it do this? So I would write these really long emails explaining, how to do it. And, it's odd to say this kind of predates YouTube to some degree too, which I say that and, I sound like your grandpa, but, it was a good time to just kind of explain how things work. So then I started thinking, well, I bet other people would want to know how to make these things too. So that's when I was teaching your class, I would put that little line out there. And my whole career is really just I'm going to throw this dart at the dartboard, and if it sticks, great. And if it doesn't stick, also great. So I put that out there, and then some people are like, wow, that's great. And then some people are like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. I never want to ever do that again. And I hate you a little bit for making me do that. Well, I never really said that, but how come you don't just let me practice? So that the book, the Max MSP Jitter for Music book, was an outgrowth of that same spirit. If you want to make little apps that can help you do a research project, or make an instrument for kids, or teach someone how to do an ear training thing, or something like that, this book will help you get there. This is not a book on how to do some new form of synthesis or something like that, although there's a little bit of that in there, but it's a very specific type of thing. And in my mind, it's a pretty good primer into get into programming for non-programmers if you want to do this sort of if you want to make little systems and things like that there too. So that's who that book was written for. And so anyway, EAMIR was largely part of that book, and the things that I'd done up until that point with EAMIR factored into the book. And now it's just an open source project. There are all sorts of kits out there and stuff. So it's still a plate that I keep spinning, and and it, again, it's open source, so you can get it on GitHub, and that's that.
Excellent. And do you have other people contributing to EAMIR, or are you the main contributor? And what's that dynamic like?
Sure. So I'm fortunate at WPI to have all sorts of really energetic and really talented students around me all the time. And without a doubt, there are students that say, I want to get involved in that. I want to make a little variation. I want to make a thing. My role is more like a curator at this point. I mean, in terms of being their professor, I do that too. But in terms of the project at large, I curate things. If they make some modifications to something that we want to factor into the branch, then we put that up there as well. So any good open source project, people don't hold the reins too tightly. There's always sort of a team or a board that kind of makes sure that nothing gets wonky and starts to break. But I try to just put it out there and say, here, do whatever. And so there are more people using that particular package than come back and then just contribute to the branch, which is fine. They certainly don't have to, but it's kind of like it's par for the course with any kind of open source thing. You put this stuff out there, and you're just being part of the solution.
And I need to recommend to our listeners and viewers, go check out vjmanzo.com. You can watch VJ get his classroom to play scales with Guitar Hero controllers, make music with little flashing lights and literal oranges, like the fruit an orange. It's wild stuff, and I definitely recommend everyone go check that out. VJ, can we talk a little bit about the Electric Guitar Innovation Lab and some of the really radically cool things you guys are doing over there?
Absolutely. Happy to talk about that. Okay, so I was tenured at WPI in, I think it was 2017. I think that's about right, and 2018 maybe. And one of the things that I wanted to do was, I never want to be bored, right? So like, that's the thing. And part of me keeping my mojo going is to keep a lot of different plates spinning and a lot of seemingly different things that are all under these umbrellas of technology informing musicianship, and then musicianship being facilitated by technology. And I am a guitar player, and I love the guitar. And I noticed that we had all of these engineering students around on campus. So I started WPI in 2012, and there was always a student who built a guitar with their dad, or some student who wants to talk about pedals or wants to do this. And WPI is a great school. It's an interesting school in that there are not like when you were at Montclair, there were so many bands all the time, there were bands just everywhere. I remember there being like all these campus bands, and that's like a typical kind of university thing. But at WPI, I don't know what it is. There aren't a lot of like rock bands, it's not the same as like a regular like liberal arts school. I assume that there's some person who plays Wonderwall in some frat house someplace.
There is always someone somewhere in some frat house playing Wonderwall. It is 24/7. It's always 5 o'clock somewhere. There's always someone playing Wonderwall.
Playing Wonderwall, right? Exactly. Some open mic. They're hacking through Landslide. Like they spend all the spring break practicing it. Can't get this pattern. So anyway, WPI, there for the lack of overtly advertising bands, there are a lot of people that do like guitars and that do, like I said, they want to get into these things. So I say, well, why don't we do a thing? I play guitar. I can talk with you about guitars. Why don't we work on a thing together? Let's do a mod to this guitar. Let's do this thing. And so after I was tenured, I thought, let's go all in on this. I've already got the interactive music systems thing going. Why don't we start up a guitar lab? And so it turns out that it's, to my knowledge, the only electric guitar lab of its kind. And so here it is, the Electric Guitar Innovation Lab. And as soon as you stop, like, kind of laughing at it or whatever, not you, but like, as soon as you get over the fact that it's like a guitar lab that's focused on, or a research lab that's focused on electric guitar stuff, you can see it as like the treehouse of fun that it really is, just like, who doesn't want to talk about guitars all day, and amps. And when we say innovation, we mean like, not like with LEDs and a fretboard, guitars are like double guitars, to quote Otto. So we're interested in pushing the thing forward and helping people who want to push the envelope with their own musicianship, push that forward. And whether that be in new electronics or adaptations to the instrument, or exploring some aspects of composite materials or new materials or whatever, we're on board for all of that stuff. And no idea is stupid. And we do that. So that's been my passion project for a while now, and it's a lot of fun. We have all sorts of great people that partner with us. One of my heroes, Ken Parker, who is famous. And so these guitarists.
You got a guitar in the background.
Oh yeah. The Parker Fly. Yeah, I mean, this is like, if ever I was to admit that I was obsessed with a particular musical instrument, that is definitely one. So, when I started the Guitar Lab, I thought I want to be around people who want to have a good time and want to talk about these things. And I just want to surround myself with positive energy and enthusiasm for the things that we love about tools, that we use to make music. And so Ken Parker was one of those guys. He's moved on. He makes archtop guitars now too, which to me, I'm like, okay, well, that's great. I don't really know a whole lot about archtop guitars, but let's talk about that. And so then what do we do in the Guitar Lab? We involve students in that conversation about archtop guitars. What would you change about guitars? What do you like about them? What things work? What things tend to not work so well? Well, they don't always hold tune so well, and it'd be great if they had a different type of range, and we'd like to do some things that they're more ergonomic, that they're easier to produce. So we have all sorts of conversations about that. And as soon as you start having a conversation about guitars and doing things and talking about, everything is fair game. That person that who is like, oh, these are Russian tubes from pre-Soviet, that's not like my particular like flair of a conversation to have. When I was like a teenager, you know what I'm talking about? That person? When I was
yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, somebody listening maybe is that person, but like I remember being a teenager and like my first guitar teacher would talk about these things, and I would just kind of like space out and disappear. Sure, and but that person is welcome at all the events we do, and they are. I'm always impressed when we have one of these functions. We have a little guitar gathering, and I'm always impressed that people come together and talk about these things. And men and women, all sorts of people. My lab is mostly run by women, which might be surprising to some people, but it's an equal place. It's a safe place for people to just come in, and the only thing that you're going to be judged on is the quality of your insights about what you bring to the table. And for me, that is so thrilling. I want that. Who doesn't love talking about music and technology and guitars? So do that here. And look, here's a whole bucket of parts you can mess around with. We have this giant treasure chest in the lab that I found on Craigslist. Like a little like a pirate chest thing that lives in the lab. And everyone who work there, I have a certain group of students that work in the lab. They are the research associate technicians. The lab rats is what the acronym.
Oh no!
I know, it's pretty painful. Yeah. Anyway, they get to go into the crypt of the great Manzini, and they get to keep everything that's in the treasure chest. Like all like random pickups that I found from when I was 15 and stuff like that. So, and then they do stuff with it, and that's the only thing. Take anything you want, but just do something awesome with it. And so that's my bag these days.
So can you talk a little bit about some of the innovations that have come out of the Guitar Lab, such as the nifty jack that you guys invented for getting different sounds out of a guitar at the same time.
The T4RS Jack. Yeah. So, so here's like thank you for bringing that up. Here's the deal with the T4RS Jack. So I'm working on this audio play now, or I was doing a lot of tracking for this thing, and so I was really focusing
DJ,
a lot.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you clarify for everyone, including me, what an audio play is?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll an audio play is like it's like a play, almost like an audio book that you would hear, where characters are speaking, but there's also music that goes along with that. So this is something that is in the pipeline now, and there's quite a bit of original music that's gone with that. It's not finalized, but we are working on it. It's going to be more like an interactive storybook. If you're interested in that, I have you can get on the mailing list. It's vjmanzo.com/play. But I will just say that it's a play that has music in it, but not a musical. So anyway, all this to say, I've been doing a lot of recording for the past couple of years and really thinking about, I mean, the typical thing that like all musicians do, and particularly guitarists, like chasing that tone, like dialing my tone. So one of the thoughts that I had, or one of the problems that I had, was I would play a pattern and I would have my neck pickup on and be like, oh, I really like that sound. So dial in the amp to really flatter that neck pickup sound. Okay.
And well, I'm sorry to jump in on you again.
That's okay.
Just to clarify, you use the unit pattern. More colloquially, we would call that perhaps a riff or a lick, but you're calling it a pattern. Just to clarify for our listeners, I went and watched the video, so I understand. I'm just translating.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. No, that's all good. Yeah. So I mean, really, just being in the studio. This is the downside of when people say, like, I want to have those options, when they're recording. I want to have a million different tone options and whatnot. Eventually, you have to choose, like one of those options. So on a guitar, there are typically 2 or 3 magnetic transducers on them called pickups. And you can pick one of those pickups to use as your sound, or you can kind of sum them together in certain situations. But they have different voices. It's like standing close to the mic or standing far away from the mic. So there are timbral differences there too. So the difficulty as a guitar player, if you're thinking in terms of an album, you might have a certain amp sound that flatters a certain pickup, and you say, oh, I really like that sound. Well, how does it sound if I change the pickup and change the amp sound? Well, that also sounds good. So, which one do I want? And if you're VJ Manzo, then you go on this wild goose chase where you then make a guitar jack that lets you get both of those signals, and however many pickups you have, you can get them all, and then you can layer them on top, and you get this really produced type of sound. So that's how a project comes into my labs. Is somebody says, I want to do this thing. And every time I tell people about it, they say, that's crazy. Or they just go, oh my God, that's amazing. And then like they dismiss me, And so if you've ever felt like that, then you can come to my lab and we'll work on your project with you, and we won't just trivialize, oh my God. So now we have a jack that, it just is a replacement for your regular guitar jack. You can still use a regular cable and it works exactly the same. But if you use our special nifty cable, then it fans out to a breakout box, and you can get the neck pickup by itself, the bridge pickup by itself, the middle pickup by itself, and then you can layer those sounds however you want. So if you're a keyboard player and you work with particularly like synthesizers, you're very used to this idea, most likely, of layering synthesized sounds on top of each other to dial in a particular type of sound. And that's most things. The idea that you're going to load up some synth and just get the sound that you want with one set, it doesn't really happen like that. You always need like I want a little pluck from this thing, I want a little whatever ambience from this thing. So now you can do that with guitar. The neck pickup tends to be a warmer, woofier type of sound, but then the bridge pickup can give a little bit of clarity and bite, and then you don't have to worry about playing it the same twice. You just record one session, and you've got these 3 or 4 different signals that you've got coming at you.
Or even up to 5, I think, in the case of like a Stratocaster.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's pretty useful for studio people too, that you can have a session player come in and then just track the great performance and then worry later on which one of these things you're going to use, and how many of them you're going to use. So, yeah, I forget. Are you a Strat player?
Yeah. All right, if we're going to get into this, we're going to get into this. So,
all right, I'm ready.
All right, so I was Les Paul ride or die up until, I don't know, a couple years of, playing professionally. My income was based solely off of making music. And what started to happen is I wanted to bend strings. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to bend a string on a Les Paul versus bending a string on a Stratocaster, but there's something about the geometry there where the Stratocaster just invites you to bend strings. It's like, okay, we're bending. Yeah. And whereas Les Paul, especially for the standard size neck, I know they make wider necks, which I have not tried, so Gibson, not writing you off yet. That's on me. I have not tried it. But those skinnier necks, and there's something about the geometry of the Les Paul, especially past the 12th fret, when you're trying to bend, it's just, there's more fight to it. Yeah. It's, you use same gauge strings, you use same length neck, all of that good stuff. There's just something about the neck on the Strat. So when speed is not of concern and it's more of an expressive playing situation, I'll always go for the Strat because it just leaves so much more room for those. For me, it's a lot easier to be expressive on the Strat. It's a lot easier to be fast and rock on a Les Paul. It's like driving different cars.
Okay, yeah. I started off my music career as a Strat person, and there was a guy in my church who had a Les Paul, and I was like, wow, I have to start working out if I can carry this thing. It's like, as a kid, it's like, it may as well be 50 pounds, these types of things versus Strat. Now I exclusively play these Parker Fly guitars, which are no longer made, but those things are like 4 pounds. So now when I play anybody's guitar, even like an Ibanez guitar, I'm like, oh, it's so heavy. I'm like, what's wrong with you?
Well, yeah, anyway. Especially on the Gibsons, where they didn't used to make it a flat back. They used to have this whole extra 10 pounds of wood that would stick out, and then it would curve in to meet the pickup guard side of the guitar. And then what they started doing, mine's in the case, I can't show you, but they basically started chopping all that off, so the back of the Les Paul is flat now, so it's like 4 pounds lighter. But again, that's a whole like Parker guitar lighter, so
yeah. Exactly. The part that they shave off of a normal guitar. Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, but it's funny. Like, I have friends that are just used to it, and it's I guess it's like any other type of tool, really. Like, you get used to what you get used to, and you kind of make it work. You've probably seen these videos where people like Eddie Van Halen play these like Hello Kitty type guitars, like cheap entry level things, and they make them sound great. You can tell there's something not so perfect about the tone, but they make it work. They compensate for it on the fly there too.
Oh yeah, I've seen like Mike Portnoy play like a Hello Kitty like toy drum kit like a beast, like a beast.
It's awesome. Oh my gosh, yeah.
So VJ, do you have any new exciting projects? Or I shouldn't say exciting. That's such a limited qualifier. No. But do you have any new projects coming out of the EGIL, or are things just sort of in the works right now?
We do, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. We call it EGIL for short.
Okay,
so yeah, no, it's cool.
The eagle has landed.
The eagle has landed. Yeah. If we decide, we have a couple things where we might be doing the acoustic guitar route, and then it'll be more visibly eagle. If we add the electric acoustic guitar.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're not there yet, and we're certainly not going to call it GIL, the Guitar Innovation Lab. Just GIL. That guy that hangs around after your gig, helps you clean up.
Gil.
Yeah, Gil. Yeah. I don't know.
He's had one too many drinks at the bar.
Yeah,
he's feeling
exactly.
very friendly. He's going to help you carry your amp out to your car. We all know Gil.
Awesome. So a couple years ago, I got interested in the life of Les Paul and the human being, not the guitar. I didn't really know a lot about his life until I started really exploring it further. And I guess not a lot of people do. No judgment if you don't. But he's definitely one of these people that is worth looking up and reading about because he really, to me, without here's a small love session on Les Paul. He really embodies everything that I want to do with the Guitar Lab and with a lot of things. Like here's a person from Wisconsin who didn't have a lot of money growing up, didn't really have a lot of opportunities, and he just made it work. And he had some people in his life that helped him make it work. So, for example, when there's this project that is called The Rail, and so how did this one come about? He's walking around by the railroad tracks outside of his house with his friends, and he finds a piece of discarded railroad tie, and like a kid, he brings it back to his house, and then very much not like a kid, he decides, I'm going to string a guitar string on it, and he gets 2 nails and kind of fixes it to the rail and starts plucking it and makes it tighter, and then he takes apart his mom's phone to make a microphone, like a pickup out of it, and hashtag mom of the year. And this guy's whole life was just like, sure thing, Les. That was my family phone, but yeah, take it apart, do it. And, so that was his whole bag, that type of spirit of just like, I wonder what will happen if. And I heard this story recently where a friend of mine who knew Les was hearing this story of Les saying, I wanted to find out which of the microphones in my vast collection. This was later on in his life. He had, like most of us, you accumulate all of these different pieces of music technology, microphones and stuff like that. So he has all these mics, and I want to know which one has the best low end, which one captures low end the best. And so he's telling my friend this story. You know how I found out? No, Les, how did you find out? We had a thunderstorm, and I lined them all up on the front porch, and I recorded all of them. and then we listened back and said, like, oh, that one, that's what it sounded like. You listened to them all. So, for me as like a teacher and an aspiring, all of these other types of things, that's what it takes. That's what it takes to do it. And man, that guy just did it. And so, so this is the type of thing that we do in particular aspects of courses related to EGIL. We talk about people who are just pushing the envelope and trying stuff out fearlessly without being like, oh, what's the return on investment for the amount of hours and money that you spend on, that whole type of rhetoric is not really something that we welcome and we entertain for very often. We want to try to be as informed and do as much research as we can before we commit to anything that requires capital, requires types of things. So we have a library. We're able to access journals and do that. But then a lot of what we try to do is just that same spirit of exploration and experimentation. And so Les Paul has really been a great person for us as a lab to model. So we recreate a variety of things that he tried. And, is there any fear that we'll ever run out? No, I mean, this guy spent his whole life just trying stuff out. So like we couldn't in a lifetime recreate all the things that he's doing. So we've recreated the rails. I have a summer camp that I'll be doing with the middle school kids summer camp that we're going to do. This year it's going to be online because of the COVID thing. And, but we made these little rail kits that are like 3D printed rails, and then they get to kind of put them together. So like, and it's got 2 tuners on it. So like slight improvements. So that's pretty cool. Like if you've never played an instrument before, like now you can get exposed to the idea of, doing that. And so, so we try to do a lot of experiments like that are, a nod to Les. We learn about his life, and then we come up with a thing that we can share and then use with others. Same thing with a lot of people don't know that Les made guitar effects too. That this was actually an area of interest to him too. Predates pedals necessarily. That wasn't quite the form factor they were using back then, but he did some very interesting things. So we made a pedal kit actually that helps us develop pedals more easily, and so we've been going through a variety of Les Paul's songs and looking at ways that he did some types of effects in post production, and then we try to backwards, kind of reverse engineer those into a pedal that we can also use in the camp. So the kids in this camp will be using the rail and then also these pedals that we have to mess around with some things there too. So it's fun.
That is super cool.
Yeah, thanks.
So you mentioned when you were talking about EGIL, the IMSLab, the Interactive Music Systems Lab. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you guys are working on now?
Sure. So that's sort of an extension of all things EAMIR, those types of projects. And the idea really is that we use different types of controllers. We think about different ways that people can make music and have musical experiences using adaptive controllers or things that are a little more accessible. So right now we're working with a client who has an idea with, it's a sponsor really. He's a person from the outside who came in and said, I want to come up with a new controller that can just get my friends to play chords so that when I'm playing guitar, they can play this thing. And then we can all kind of jam together. So what we do then is we look at what are the cost barriers here? What are the accessibility barriers here? Who is going to be playing this? Is this like an adult size hand? Is this going to be something that needs to be affixed to a wheelchair or something like that? And then, we just divide and conquer. Like, all right, so what kind of sounds does this thing make? Okay, I want it to make like regular piano and organ sounds there too. Okay, cool. So VJ already told us that you only need 4 keyboard sounds, so we're we're ahead of the game. That's fine. Then we just look at what types of technology are there, and then what do the buttons feel like? So we come up with things like that. Other things that we do in that lab are smaller educational experiences that might be meaningful to kids or adults or whatever. Like really just looking at what is the audience that we care about? Who are the people that we want to reach with this musical experience? What type of experience do we want them to have? Do we want them to be silly and everyone's, chaotic and out of breath at the end of it and laughing and having a good time? Do you want to facilitate a type of experience where they're feeling emotionally, stirred up and connected to this thing? Whatever that experience is in this particular audience, let's design a controller and some sort of system to meet that need and help facilitate that type of experience. How's that for speaking in general terms about all of these things? And they all go up to 11. Everything goes to 11.
Spinal Tap.
Yes.
Look it up.
Yes.
So you have a series of books published with Oxford University Press called Creating Technology for Creative Music. Now, I couldn't find these books on Amazon. Where does one get these books, VJ?
Yes. Okay. So this is a book series that's coming out now. So I'm the editor of this series, so I'm not an author in this series. But this was my idea for the book series, and OUP, they got behind this thing. So here's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to come up with a series where people could unapologetically talk about the tools that they make to make music.
I'm sorry.
What?
Unapologetically? Like the fact that qualifier has to go in first is hilarious.
Hey, welcome to academia. It's like, a lot of these conferences, it's like, here's like the real subtext. I want to talk about the Max Patch that I made. I want to talk about the cool live set or, Pro Tools session, but I can't, because you're going to judge me and I need to get tenure. And so,
wow. Okay.
I mean, it's not always like that, but that's just what it is. Like I can't just tell you how much I really enjoyed making this dope beat, but but here's how I made this dope beat. Like if it's the two of us sitting in my backyard having a cup of coffee, listen to this crazy beat that I made, this guitar sound. And I like that. And like I said, in all my labs, that happens all the time. Manzo, listen to this. Some student throws headphones at me, this noisy, type of thing there. It's great. Love it. But in the professoriate, there you sometimes have to show the relevance to pedagogy or this, and I don't mean to speak negatively about that either. I understand the value of that. But this book series is all about talking about this proud tradition that we have as musicians of making tools, and whether the tools are the instruments themselves or the tools to make the instrument. It's just talking about that, and saying how the musical goal almost always informs the technological goal, and the technological goal also helps to facilitate the musical goal there too. So it's this give and take. If you were working on a 61 key piano and then you said to some piano maker, I really want those extra low strings, can you do something there? Then this person needs to work with their team to make that happen, and what's that like, and what was that like when you couldn't just go to Home Depot and get materials and things like that? Like, what was that process like? How did they make violins before sandpaper? I mean, so like there's a lot of stories to be told there too about people who were doing the very same type of thing that we're doing now. If you've ever modified your guitar or adapted your clarinet or your flute to do something, you're part of that proud tradition of just adapting an instrument or modifying it, or speaking to something. And it's something we all do. It's just part of the terrain for as professional musicians. And it's inspiring to hear other people talk about that. So what I've done is I've hit up some people to write books along those lines. Say, we're talking about the story about how you get your tools in place, and then you do awesome musical things with it. So we have a book on, my colleague Scott Barton is writing a book on musical robotics, and like how do you get robots to do this? Like, where do you even begin with that? And we have another guy named John Thomas who's interviewing acoustic guitar builders, and really collecting the shared body of knowledge about what most professional guitar builders think about and try to aspire to when they're making guitars. We have other books on all sorts of things about process and all sorts of stuff along those lines. We have a book on Super Collider that's coming out. So it's not limited to just being technology in the sense of digital technology, but technology in the sense of any kind of tools that people use, whether they be engineered pieces of wood or code. So that's it.
We can edit this out if you want, but I was noticing on the page for the book, it says you are looking for people or open to working with people who want to write a book for this series. Is that still the case, and would you like to make that publicly known on this podcast?
I'm open to that. If somebody has an interest in something and they want to talk about that, I've got time for that person, to tell me about that. And I want the books in this series to be true to this goal of unapologetically talking about tools. Yeah. So I would entertain that. I have certainly courted a fair number of people about things that are of interest to me, but there is a lot of story to be told, with how people are doing this. And it's not always something that is easy to talk about. So one of the things you mentioned, one of the other books, Environmental Sound Artists, which is a book that I edited with my colleague, Fred Bianchi. Part of the goal there was of the same spirit, that we want to get people who are out in the field working on environmental sound, whether they be hooking up sensors to the Eiffel Tower and recording what's going on there, or they're doing more ecological types of recordings and using those in creative ways. We wanted them to be able to tell in their own words what their process was, where to even go to get funding. How do you get started with this? And so this book series, Creating Technology for Music, is along those same lines. A lot of people want to get started with musical instrument design or musical controller design, and it's difficult to know where to begin. And there are all sorts of guides out there for learning programming languages and learning electronics and things like that. But divorced of any real articulate goal, it is oftentimes very difficult to know how the things relate. So this book series is more like, for example, in the case of Scott Barton's book on musical robotics, this is the goal of what we wanted to do with this robot. We wanted to make a robot that does percussion and that we could write in a beat and it will play on these types of things. Now, here's how we did it. And one theme of the whole book series, which is really a focal point of just my professional life these days, is talking about failure and what you do when you encounter failure and just how normal it is for things to go wrong, and that it's okay. You don't have to freak out, and you should expect that, and then you just move on from there. It's too easy to give up and just quit when things don't work out, or when you realize like, oh, I got to go read a book now on like how to get, before I can continue any further, I got to go and just like, put pause for, a week, a couple weeks, but until I figure this thing out. Okay. If that's what it takes, that's what I'm going to do, because all these other people have described for me that that's a normal part of the process, which it is. And so that I've explicitly told all of the authors in this book, don't be shy about talking about all of the things that led up to your success. So that I hope is a point of novelty for this series. I hope it doesn't stay as a point of novelty for just this series. I wish it was something that we talked about more. I was the editor of a journal for a while there called Symposium. I was the editor of the music business and industry component of that journal. And that was a lovely time, and I'm still on the editorial board. But I will tell you that most of the articles that we see for review are about things that worked. And if the only things that you encounter are success stories, you're missing a lot of information. So on our internal wiki site that we use for all of the projects in my labs, we have just documented like here are the points of failure, and here's why it failed. And that's a part of it, and that's a part of the story that needs to be told. I mean, obviously you don't want to focus an entire book on just like failures. It's kind of like What About Bob series, everything's gone wrong. But it needs to be told, like how things evolve and how things move forward, because it can't just be like, check me out, this like polished, curated, never had any lessons. We all know that type of person, like, yeah, self-taught. I just started playing last week. It's not really how it goes, and if you want to be serious about moving forward and, really refining your craft, it takes learning how things go bad and how to recover from that. And just that's, I mean, I try to tell that to my students all the time. Like when they see me set something up and demo something without it breaking on stage, I'm like, yeah, it works now, like now it's fine. But like, how many times have I been there on stage and it's just like no sound at all because my operating system's updating to the latest park in California, or something like that. When I first started using laptops in live performance, they were Windows laptops. That's just what I used. And you look down at the computer, everything's great. And then you look back, blue screen of death. Oh gosh, the next song is not going to go so well, and, that's part of it, that is what it takes. Hopefully that doesn't happen on stage with millions and millions of people. But if it does, I have a funny way of, thinking that the world will continue on. It's okay. So
I think also the psychological implications are very interesting, because if you look at, for example, like men who gamble, like they will talk about the times that they win and they will not talk about the times that they lose.
Right, yeah, their wives are listening too. So,
yeah, that too. But it's like the whole thing is that even from like an evolutionary perspective, we want to celebrate the win. We want to make ourselves look important and good, and like everything that we touch is gold. I think that's just part of the human condition. And I think it's exactly right. You've got to talk about everything that went wrong. I mean, for every one success that anyone has, there's generally like tens or hundreds of failures that come before that are part of that learning process. And I think normalizing that is such a valuable thing to do.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Yeah, it's just part of, I mean, just when I think about the projects that I'm really proud of in my life too, they're not necessarily like, there are certain things where I think like, well, that was important to me when I was in my early 20s, and it's not really something that I really want to pursue now. I mean, if you go to my website, I keep the music from my teenage years up there too. I don't play music like that anymore. And like if I had to play and record that stuff again, like it's not exactly the thing that I'm the most proud of. But at the time, I was quite proud of it, and I'm not going to just disassociate myself from what was part of my life then. It was part of my life. It led me up until this point right now, and that's what it was. If you want to know what I was interested in when I was 15, it sounded like that. And these are the types of things that I said. These are the types of things that were important, and I'm proud of that because I'm on this continuum. And people need to know that that's okay. You don't just need to. I mean, for some people, they don't like to talk about the stuff from their past, and that's fine. I respect that too. But to me, I'm like, well, it's all kind of led up till this point. The person that's sitting here in front of you on YouTube or in this little rectangle, this is the story of that guy, so.
Follow in my footsteps, and you too can sit on YouTube in a little rectangle.
Be sure to hit the notification bell, like and subscribe.
Hey, VJ, I think maybe we should just plug that if anyone is interested in contributing to the series, they should go to vjmanzo.com/OUP/CTM. That's Charlie Tango Mike. And then you scroll all the way down, and there you will find the path to the rainbow, to the pot of gold.
There it is.
And if you really want to contribute, you will go and do that. And if you don't really want to contribute, you won't do that. So there we go.
There it is.
Plugged. VJ, can I ask you a little bit? Everything we've talked about has to do, to a degree, with cognition. But as I mentioned in your intro, you're a professor of music technology and cognition. Now, I don't feel that we've really focused on cognition at all today. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the work you're doing around cognition and how that relates to music, if it does?
Sure, happy to do that. So the official title there was casting somewhat of a wide net. I will just say when they were officially looking with that, I've kept it, and I've focused on education as sort of a subset of that cognition. But with that too, there are some aspects of perception that go along with that. And in our lab, everything kind of blurs. So the lines are not clearly delineated between what is music performance, what is composition, what is education, what is cognition, what is a study in perception. So things tend to be more in flux in general. If I had to refine it into the things that we're particularly focusing on, they have to do more with perception, and particularly perception of timbre is part of the focus on there. Yeah, I mean, apart from the educational things we've talked about. So I'm very much interested in a lot of the lore that people tend to have, and mystique about certain types of instrument sounds, and hearing what they think that they're hearing that they're not actually hearing, right? So like particularly as guitar players, because man, if you know guitar players, we talk about everything, like how everything matters. I mean, guitar players are just a very interesting breed. spend $400 on pickup upgrades, $1,500 amp, $3,000 guitar, $2 strings, that you got discounted from it could be recycled factory things, and then you don't change the strings for 4 months. They're growing penicillin on them. So like, this is great. Like, here we go. Let's have that conversation. All right, fine. And then that person's going to swear to you that their pickups are hotter than theirs. So, so part of what's interesting to me is, particularly related to perception, is what is actually in the recording. What do you think that you're hearing in the recording? So we're doing these studies now on instrument timbre and how different types of wood affect the timbre and how people hear these things, and what a guitar player might quantify as a warm sound, as a throaty sound, or a cold ice pick type of sound, and trying to quantify what is a good sound, really. Like what makes a good sound. Something that we always talk about with students too. Like, can you make that sound better, make it sound rounder, make it sound that? And we use these terms, and they mean something, and they might mean something different to different people.
So when you say different types of wood, the guitar is made of different types of wood, the recording studio are different types of wood, the headphones are being run through different, like, wooden headphones, like we're Keebler elves, but they're just headphones like.
Well, in this one particular study, I have to justify the fact that I have all of these different Parker flies that are all made to very tight tolerances. The only difference between each of these instruments is the body wood. So they're exactly the same in every other regard.
All the interior wiring comes from the same factories, all that stuff?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it literally exactly the same. I mean, really, really tight tolerances. Same fret material.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're all exactly the same. The only difference between them is the body wood is a different type of wood. The most popular model, the deluxe model, was made of poplar wood. I mean, they're all exactly the same, except that they use spruce wood over in this one, and they use mahogany in this one there too. The pickups are exactly the same. And so we have some studies going on right now where we're just trying to quantify, like, what are the actual spectral differences here between these things. So that's something that's very much like Guitar Lab oriented. Like, we wound up having to build this robotic plucking arm to take away the variability. I mean, like, here's like another thing about that too. It's like, a guitar in my hands sounds a certain way, and then a guitar in, John Petrucci's hands sounds quite different. So, to confound that variable, or isolate that variable of just the tone, we had to make a robot to pluck it the same way each time. So we call it Peaches, and this is this is something that my student Ryan Tugas and I have been working on for a couple of years, and it is exactly what you think it is. It's a robotic plucking mechanism that goes over the guitar and then can consistently pluck from the same height, the same force, and it's just something controlled. So I mean, here's an example of, like, you have to be okay with failure and, like, setbacks and things like that. I wanted to do these studies on guitar timbre like 2 years ago, and we needed to build a tool to get that variable of VJ Manzo plucks like this and Dan plucks like this and all of that stuff. We need to defer the goal of the actual study until we got this thing made. So some people would be like, well, I'm not going to do it because, it's just too much, but I bet that I'd still be alive in 2 years, and that I'd still be interested in the in the results of this experiment. So, we just said, all right, we're going to put that on pause, and we're going to make this tool, and we're going to do that. And so now we're able to, this summer, reap the benefits of that. We're actually doing these studies, and we have a fair amount of data on what guitar players think the differences are between these things, and then we'll have some empirical data too to compare that to. Most, and this is not just exclusive to guitarists, but a lot of musicians tend to focus on lore, and it's you're standing someplace respective to your instrument, and that is not the same distance, and the person that's sitting on the other side of you is hearing something quite different. So who is right? And there you go.
So how do you account for pick wear and then strings going dead? How often do you change strings on the guitar? How often do you change picks in the picking machine?
Yeah, so for this particular study, it's brand new strings on all the guitars that you're using, and they're all the same gauge of string, and you use the same pick. You can you just use two of the identical picks. So it's just about isolating as many variables as you can within reason. In real life, you would, it might be different, but what we're just trying to do is compare. And then you use a pickup that's respective to the plucking machine, not always the one that's in the guitar. So, yeah. So it's just controlling as many variables as you can to make sure that what you're left with is as close to just the wood of the guitar. As long as you do the same treatment to everything, then you get as close as you can.
So how many plucks per string before the string is replaced?
Well, we haven't gotten into the particulars of actually how that study is going to be done.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, but it'll be whatever it is when it is.
It'll be something. Well, I'm super stoked to see the results of that, because guitar players talk about different types of wood all the time. I was like watching Guthrie Govan talk about how he has this special guitar for playing with the aristocrats for when they go above 4,000 feet sea level. It's baked so it doesn't do this, and it's this so it doesn't do that, and all these. Listen, maybe he can hear it. I'm like going that man's ears are on another level. But I think it'd be very interesting to get, like you say, that empirical data. Because we all have our little opinions about how this sounds or that sounds, or the way we quantify this wood or that wood. And that is super cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. And this is part of the overall interest in perception and cognition too, is that when you stick a microphone in front of that amp, like if you're playing at like the Beacon Theater, something kind of cozy, you can get away with just amp sound on stage. Maybe, if you're in the balcony, you probably want to come through the PA. And if you're playing at like Madison Square Garden, you are not hearing the stage at all. The first time I saw Rush was at it was called the Tweeter Center then. It was in Camden. And my friends and I, we sat on the lawn, and we couldn't even see Rush on stage. We just it was like a video, so we may as well have been like at home, like listening there. So we're listening through speakers, we're seeing them on this tiny little screen. So it was like the Rush video, and that is part of it too. Is like, well, when you're in a recording studio, and all of our focus on tone and all of our focus on these different aspects of what factors into a good guitar tone, and then you give it to some recording engineer, and they have to squish the dynamic range to a point that you would not feel comfortable doing it. Like that is a part of it too. I remember the first time I listened to some multi-track stems from my favorite band, Queen, and listening to that bass sound, what the bass sounds like with this heavy compression and EQ. And I remember thinking to myself, if you bought, that's what's right for that mix. Like that song needs the bass to sound like that in that mix, but you would never, ever, ever go into a Guitar Center or Sam Ash and buy a pedal that made your bass sound like that. And, and the same thing with guitar, like if you bought a guitar, if you hear what a guitar actually has to sound like isolated on an album, you would never, ever want to buy an amp that sounded like that. But it's what's appropriate for the mix and the album. And it's something that we hear all the time. So like, where does that factor in? Isn't that really weird? We listen to these really like crystalline, and I use a bias amp plugin, just in my DAW, and it sounds close to like a mic'd amp in a room if you're listening to it in a control room. But then you think about what a mix engineer must do to that signal, to any signal, to a bunch of things in order to make something sound polished for an album. And as a guitar player, it's almost like, all right, do that as soon as I leave the room. I don't want to hear what it sounds like. But it definitely doesn't sound like, a guitar in the room, except then you hear it in the mix and you're like, oh, wow, it does sound like the guitar is in the room. Like that's weird, and it's a phenomenon that we all experience every single day. And so there's a lot there. How far can you get away with just decimating the sound until people start to say, like, it's too much,
I think one exception maybe would be maybe like a bassist like Billy Sheehan, who actually uses compression as part of his playing technique. That's actually part of his live sound, also because he does a lot of that sort of like light tapping stuff on the bass. So he actually uses the compression in order to attain the sound he wants. But I think what's interesting on top of that is you could say, well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is Billy Sheehan trying to get that sound because that's the sound he wants, or has he listened to his own records, like the way he sound on the record, and then is emulating it live? We'd have to ask him.
Yeah. Is he a guest on this show? Yeah.
No, he should be. But we'll make it happen.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I mean, the point is that you're right, and there's a lot of terrain to be explored there too, and any sort of mixing is compromising, really, and this is it's hard to know what you can control for on the other end too. You never know who's listening on good headphones. Like, we both have great sets of headphones on right now, but someone is almost for sure listening to this podcast through their phone speaker or on some little, MacBook laptop speakers where they sound better when your hands cover them. It's you never know. You never know what's on the other end. So a good mix engineer, or a really good mastering engineer, tries to split the difference and make something sound kind of great on everything.
Yeah, it's very true. It's a game of compromise.
Yeah,
without a doubt. So, VJ, I think we can move into the second half of this podcast. It will not be equal in duration to the first half.
Okay.
Fret not.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I'm fully caffeinated here. So,
caffeinated and ready to rumble.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in the same way that you are trying to normalize the conversation around failures leading to successes, I'm trying to normalize the conversation around what it takes to be a successful musician in any field of music over the long term. And I include that being a professor, a mix engineer, performer, roadie, whatever it is. There's certain things lifestyle-wise that need to be in place for someone to be able to make a career out of this, as with anything, that just don't get talked about.
Okay.
So I'll ask you a couple questions. We can do this rapid fire. We'll talk about things like lifestyle, practice, creativity, everything that goes around the sort of thing that we all got into this for, which was making music or inspiring others to make music.
Sure.
Cool. So let's get rocking and rolling.
Okay.
So, and you can answer these as fast as you want, like 2-word answers is okay, or you can go into detail.
All right, I'm nervous. All right,
here we go. So, how many hours do you like to sleep a night, and how do you find that sleep impacts your ability to perform and be creative?
Ideally, I would sleep 10 hours a night, but that does not happen. So my wife and I, we have these Chihuahuas. In fact, you might hear one barking in the distance. There's one right here, and then we have this other little rescue. The Buddy and Holly are the two that we have right here. So Buddy's on my lap for this whole podcast. Without fail, they wake us up right at 8 hours, and then which it does not work well. And 8 hours respective to when we put them to bed. So that's not good. If you have to have it that way, you don't want to be on a Chihuahua sleep schedule, but that's what happens. So sometimes it's 7 hours. Sometimes it's less than that. Sometimes it's 8 hours. So that's sleep. I prefer more sleep, but I haven't gotten that since I was a teenager.
And how do you find that getting sleep or lack of sleep impacts your creativity and ability to perform?
When I don't sleep enough, I riff in my classes in a way that is, I would feel embarrassed about later. It's more like I've gone on plenty of tangents here, and I can tell you it's even worse. It's like a bad Family Guy episode when I'm, when I'm really, I mean, it's probably quite entertaining. And I think that the analogies are always on, but there are definitely more Wayne's World quotes happening, when I've only had 6 hours. It's they don't play bingo just yet, with like, has he quoted Anchorman yet? Has he quoted, So I suppose there's still some hope for me. But I do try to get as much sleep as I can, and but I also tend to reserve the important work that I'm doing for the part of the day where I'm feeling the most energetic. So I don't tend to get into music stuff like right when I wake up, and I normally do that like in the late afternoon or something like after I've been awake for a little bit while. I'm starting to feel like that good thing, and I try not to mix after 11 o'clock because your brain starts to do weird things where it like shuts down certain bands of frequencies.
AM or PM?
Oh no, PM. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, when I was in my teenage years, in my early 20s, I'd be up until 4 a.m, 5 o'clock in the morning, just like doing things. And now I'm getting a workflow that's much better. But really it has a lot to do with just being more disciplined. And after a while, if you're mixing the same part over and over again, your brain plays these tricks on you where, and you wind up damaging things. So I remember hearing things, you're fixing things at like, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, you're not fixing it.
Yeah, exactly. And now I know that. Now in these years, I know that, like, that, do not do that. Like don't start backing up a hard drive past 11 o'clock PM. Like don't do anything mission critical after a certain hour. So that's good.
Have you ever used mindfulness or meditation to impact creativity or performance?
No, not really, but not in an intentional way anyway. And I certainly have no aversion to it, but I do enjoy peace and quiet. I remember
Get off my lawn. Have you ever tried exercising to impact creativity or performance?
Never intentionally, but I do try to stay in relatively good shape. That happens more often than not just through taking walks. During the pandemic, my wife and I did do these exercise videos together. And that was kind of fun and interesting. I've never done anything like that, but that was pretty good. But typically, like when I'm on campus, I'm running around from building to building, and typically running to Dunkin' Donuts to get more coffee, and then coming back around there too. So I tend to keep the energy moving there too, and I just do feel better about myself in terms of that. I'm also vegan, so I don't I don't eat like when I was in high school. Like I remember like we would go to Applebee's or one of these like big food places, and then like you have to cancel plans because you're too full. Like you ever do that? Like, like I ate this gigantic steak and now like, that's it, I'm done for the night, and then a little bit of tomorrow. So, when you're vegan, you don't have any fun with food anymore. So I don't, I don't do that. So, but the good side is that I'm generally not feeling like a food coma, I guess is the term used. So.
And do you see any impact on creativity or performance with the veganism?
Just a healthier lifestyle in general, I think, helps me to stay good. If I have more energy longer, I'm able to just kind of get in the zone and do what I'm doing without interruptions. So,
do you define yourself as a musician, a human who plays music, or something else?
That is a great question. So knee-jerk response is human being. That's typically what I say, just who I am. However, I would be lying if I said that music was not really part of how I identify myself and how most other people identify me. It's a lot of my identity is tied to those types of things, and in professional circles, that's just what I'm known for, and I'm okay with that. But I'm not really in the position where I'm just VJ the guitarist, or I'm just VJ the the programmer guy, or anything like that too. So I'm quite fortunate that I think most people see me as just VJ. He does some kind of weird stuff with with creative stuff, and and which I'm okay with. So when I think human being, like, yeah, that's okay, because he's like that type on the continuum of all types of human beings that might exist in the world. Yeah, he's that type of human being. How's that?
Perfect.
All right,
let's talk a little bit about creativity. Do you take any steps to stay creative?
Okay. So I don't really know what creativity is in certain terms. Okay. I know something, I can spot creativity when I see it, but I am not going to pretend that I know what really makes something creative. I know how to create something. I know how to give some students some instructions and say, here is a recipe that you can follow to get going with things. But if you've ever composed anything, whether that be music or something written, or you've done a drawing or something like that, there's this part that for me takes over and or chimes in, and I'm someplace else doing this thing, and I don't know exactly what that is, but if you've been there, you've been there, and I'm sure you've been there, where something is happening, something is evolving, something is growing, and it has a lot to do with your experiences. Of course, we know that. It has a lot to do with various things that you've encountered, and maybe even recently, and just the regurgitation of stuff that you've experienced in your life. But what makes that happen, that initial spark, is kind of, to me, is as close to magic as we get. And now I will say this too. When I was an undergrad and I was I took my first composition lesson with this guy, Matt Halper, and he said, okay, we'll bring in some stuff that you've been working on. And I've been working on some stuff over the summer, this guitar piece. And I showed him what I did, and it took me all this time to come up with like about two or 3 minutes of music. And he said, okay, that's great. So for next week, come up with another 45 seconds, minute of music. And I remember being so scandalized and thinking, does he not know I am VJ Man? I didn't really say it like that, but like, I need to be inspired. I need to be, the moon has to be just right, and all these types of things. And that's all that stuff that you hear. Like, oh, how did you come up with this hit song that is now all over the radio? Oh, we weren't intending to make a hit record, and we made a hit record. And I said to Thomas, can you just play something on the guitar? And then we blinked our eyes, and 5 minutes later we had this hit song. And oh my gosh.
By the way, if anyone has not watched 60s interviews of groups talking about making songs, that's exactly it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then I mean, I grew up watching things like that, and then thinking like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Like, why is it like work? I remember watching actually this documentary. I think it was the Rattle and Hum video with U2, where they were talking about what it's like being on tour. It may have been just a documentary on U2, but the drummer was talking about. I think he mentioned seeing Bruce Springsteen play. He's like, and I saw Springsteen play, and it seemed effortless. And he's like, so we would get up on stage, and it would feel like work. And I remember feeling like, that is exactly what it feels like after I have the initial spark. Like, it feels like work. It doesn't feel like work that I don't love doing. Obviously, I've dedicated my life to the stuff that I'm doing, and that has its own kind of magic. But if you're the type of person that has like 400 unfinished projects, you need to get the other part of it. I mean, you don't have to do anything except get old and die. But for me, I need to remind myself that part of that is being disciplined to finish through it, even when I don't feel like doing it. So I set schedules, and everyone's excited about what they're doing for the first few minutes, first couple weeks, first couple months, and then you have to commit to it. And so I commit to this side of VJ Manzo that was excited when the project started, and I say like, well, that guy had the right idea, so I'm gonna, even though I'm not that person like I was a couple weeks ago, I'm gonna hold true to what he started then, and then put on a different hat if needed, and just kind of finish it.
Do you ever have a time or times of day where you feel more creative? You mentioned you have this sort of late afternoon that you like to work on more sort of mission critical things. Is that the time of day where you feel more creative?
Yeah, it has gone through various different. I've gone through various schedules in my lifetime, and the schedule that I currently have, I don't think anyone was better than the other, but it just has fluctuated. So the current schedule that I have it seems to be working pretty good for me. And I wake up, have coffee, feed the chihuahuas, have a little breakfast, and I tend to watch an episode of Seinfeld with my wife because it's like my favorite show ever, and that's something we can do together and just kind of ease into the day. I don't really start thinking until sometime after that, and I if I can, I would like to not sink all of the energy and enthusiasm I have into responding to emails. So, like I just have this, and then look, this is what's right for me, and it might not be right for everybody, but it only takes one cranky email or a disappointed thing or one crisis, pardon me, or one crisis to focus, to get my attention focused elsewhere. And then I don't need to, how am I going to then pretend like I'm, in Guitar Zone over here and, thinking about this and solving other problems. So if I can defer that part of my brain until sometime after I've put my energy into the creative thing that I'm doing. That's the harder thing. That's the thing where it takes a lot of energy, and I really want to sink my effort into that unknown. That how am I going to solve this problem creatively? How am I going to think about this thing clearly? And you only have so much of that firepower in the day, and I don't need to sink it into an expense report. Like finding receipts for something that I bought someplace.
Have you ever experienced burnout from too much time spent specifically on music?
Yes, I have. And I think I'm probably a little bit obsessive with certain things. And there are times where I'll be going to bed and I'll still be automating something, in my head, and can't really sleep because I'm doing the same type of thing and all that. And that to me is a sign that that's not something I like. And so I try to avoid situations where I do that, and it's a sign like, all right, just get some fresh air and try not to do that. So yes, I have.
When you have burned out, how long was, let's say, the longest time, if it's been multiple times that it happened, and then what did you do to recover?
I don't really recall how long it was, but typically I try to bounce back to things within a day, couple days, or something like that. And this is why, for me, I like to have a lot of different projects spinning at one time, particularly projects that are not on a scheduled due date. I don't like feeling overwhelmed with things, but I do like having a lot of variety. So for this audio play thing that I'm doing, there are certain types of different bands in the play. So I can write music with my flies with a certain setup of, drum sounds and bass sounds and things like that. And then I can switch to music that's in a very different style with a Telecaster and different types of amps and different type of thing. And then in terms of like the recovery time, I might just set the inputs to in and just play a little bit and just kind of noodle around and and do that sort of thing. So yeah.
VJ, those are all my questions for you. You have anything else you want to say, or anything you think we should talk about that we didn't talk about?
Well, just the importance of eating right, exercise daily, eat your vegetables. No, I think that is it. If anyone wants to reach out, you can, as you mentioned, there's a lot of stuff on my website. I spent a lot of time in my in my teenage years getting that thing going, and it's bizarre how it's just still a pet project of mine, making sure that thing looks good. But I put a lot of heart into that site, so I'm glad that it served you well to find out more about me. And if you want to know more about me, there's a lot that's up there.
You can find VJ at vjmanzo.com. That's VJMANZO.com. YouTube.com/VJManzo and Electric Guitar Innovation Lab.org, all spelled conventionally. We'll have links in the show notes and in the description if you're watching on YouTube. VJ, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Dan.